Hey guys, tonight we slip into dawn's soft glow, where the sun casts honeyed beams across colossal stone walls that seem to hum with ancient secrets, and you almost hear the whisper of long-gone footsteps. Picture yourself stepping carefully between giant weathered blocks, the air cool and still, while a distant lark trills a sleepy tune, cheesy, sure, but somehow oddly comforting. This isn't just some Instagram filter. You're about to stroll through the bones of a real medieval metropolis, minus the chaos of traffic and spilled coffee. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely plan to join this history-fueled nap train. Post your location and local time down in the comments so we can see where in the world you're cozying up right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's drift together. You wake to the muted shimmer of granite as it stretches across rolling hills, each block meticulously stacked without a drop of mortar to hold it in place. You trudge along a narrow path where tufts of grass peek between stones polished by centuries of wind. Mainstream accounts tell us Great Zimbabwe rose to power between the 11th and 15th centuries as the heart of a prosperous Shona kingdom trading gold and ivory, but here, in the hush before sunrise, those facts feel like distant echoes. Less instructive than the tactile weight of history under your fingertips. Historians still argue whether the sprawling enclosures were built all at once or in deliberate phases, but you're more intrigued by the thought that every stone you pass could have been carried by hand, each block a silent testament to human perseverance. Your foot brushes against a small mound of ochre-stained sand, nothing more than a chance deposit, you'd think, except local folklore whispers of hidden time capsules, simple clay pots buried under the eastern wall, rumored to contain offerings to ancestral spirits. Fringe researchers sometimes claim these vessels hold clues to a secret alignment with the stars, or perhaps a forgotten calendrical code, though mainstream archaeology balks at such speculation. You smile at the idea that somewhere beneath your boots, a tiny shard might be humming with cosmic meaning, tiny enough to slip into your pocket if you dared. As the sun lifts higher, its rays filter through a narrow gap where two monumental walls converge at nearly perfect right angles. You pause, lean against the cool stone, and breathe in a scent that's part warm granite and part crushed wildflowers from the nearby scrub. There's something soothing about the solidity here, a reminder that human ambition can outlast empires. A light breeze stirs the dust, and you imagine how medieval craftsmen must have felt carving these stones under a scorching sun, an image both humbling and oddly endearing. Maybe they traded jokes about sore shoulders or cursed the weight of their chisels, much like you might grumble about your morning coffee mug being too heavy. Between these walls, corridors form shadowed passageways that lead nowhere or loop back on themselves. You crouch to peer down one low archway and spot a patch of lichen glowing pale green in the gloom. It's the same genus that once inspired local healers to craft soothing poultices for toothaches, an everyday remedy centuries old, and a far cry from today's chemical concoctions. You pinch a fleck of moss between your fingers, it feels softer than you expected, like velvet left out in the rain. Oddly, the contrast of such delicate life clinging to massive stone makes you grin, you're witnessing coexistence on the grandest scale. Here and there, a fallen block lies half buried in dried grasses, each collapse telling a story of earthquakes, erosion, and human neglect. Yet, the overall structure stands resolute, like some stoic sentinel guarding the valley below. Modern visitors often post drone footage of these silent ramparts set against rolling hills, but you know true immersion demands walking this labyrinth barefoot, boots crunching and ankles rolling just enough to keep you alert. You brush a finger along a carved groove, part of an old drainage channel, and consider how ingenious it was to keep torrential rains from washing away wealth and livelihood. Technological marvels of their time included rudimentary but effective water management systems. A mainstream testament to medieval innovation, birdsong drifts in from the scrub beyond, and you half expect to see the giant soapstone birds, those enigmatic sculptures perched on tower tops, calling to you. Although you can't see them from here, their memory hangs in the air, sleek, stylized forms that must have looked like otherworldly guardians when they first crowned the walls. Locals joke that these birds were ancient versions of security cameras, forever on watch for unwelcome visitors. Even fringe blogs sometimes spin tales that the sculptures house tiny orbits for hidden gem eyes, but you know that's more bedtime fable than hard evidence. Still, it's hard not to picture them blinking open under moonlight, scanning the horizon for whispered threats or nighttime traders. Moving deeper, you notice narrow slits in the walls, once ventilation shafts for granaries holding millet and sorghum. You lean in to feel a gentle draft that could cool grain stores in searing heat. A mainstream historical fact, these granaries powered a thriving trade network that stretched all the way to the Swahili coast. Without those clever airways, the city's wealth might have rotted away instead of reaching distant markets. You imagine bustling caravans full of ivory and beeswax trundling down winding paths, each merchant hoping for a taste of great Zimbabwe's famed hospitality. A stray guinea fowl wanders through the stones, pecking at insects disturbed by your passage. You grin at its clumsy gait, completely at odds with the monumental dignity around you. Silly, you think, how life finds a way even among ruin. You tap your foot as if setting a rhythm, half listening for echoes of distant drums that might once signaled a royal procession. The city's heart beat through ceremony and craft, a vibrant pulse now muted into these golden tones of dawn. You straighten, dust off your hands, and survey the scene, endless walls shimmering, silent but near magical in their suggestion of lost grandeur. There's no clickbait here, no sudden twist, just you, the stones, and the ancient promise that every ruin tells a story if you're patient enough to listen. And tonight, you're settling in for a long, slow tale where each stone's a sentence and every whispered breeze a punctuation mark. You step gingerly across a stretch where sunlight pools like liquid gold, and you can almost taste the warmth on your tongue. Beneath your boots lies the living whisper of centuries, the oral legends of the Shona ancestors who wove the first threads of great Zimbabwe's tapestry. You listen closely, well, as closely as someone trying not to trip over a stray rock can, and imagine the campfire glow of storytellers, their voices rising and falling like a lullaby. These elders spoke of builders guided by the spirits of their forebears, souls carried on the wind to shape stones into sanctuary. Mainstream historians agree that the city was founded around the late 10th century by early Shona communities. A fact confirmed by radiocarbon dating of charcoal from those first hearths. Legend tells of a matriarchal figure, often called Mukumwi, who discovered a natural stone outcrop and, entranced, coaxed her people to pile rocks into protective enclosures. You squint at a lone boulder that could have been a stepping stone in her vision. There's a logic to it. Those first walls likely began as simple animal enclosures, evolving over generations into the grand ramparts you explore now. It's a classic architectural snowball effect. Start with a pen for goats, end with something that'd make a modern architect question their career choices. Fringe storytellers spin wilder yarns. They claim Mukumwi's guiding spirit was a giant bird that swept across the plains, pecking at loose boulders and leaving them arranged just so. You chuckle at the image of a celestial avian interior decorator, but the idea lingers like a half-remembered dream. Some even insist that early builders carved monolithic bird talons into the lowest layers of the walls to honor their feathered muse. Archaeology hasn't backed up that specific claim, yet, though it's hard to deny the prevalence of bird imagery later in the site's art. As you wander, your fingers graze faint carvings on a weathered slab, concentric circles and zigzag lines that match motifs still painted on traditional Shona huts today. It's a mainstream connection that thrills you, a subtle bridge between past and present. You can almost hear a child's playful taunt echoing through time. "Dad, tell that story again, about the first stones rising." By day, those patterns helped identify clan lineages. By night, they sparked stories that sent sleepy heads nodding, trail dust drifts up in lazy spirals, disturbed by the occasional breeze. You pause to inhale the earthy scent, like damp clay mixed with distant incense, and wonder what incense scents these oral historians employed. Perhaps the crackle of burning mopane wood wrapped around frankincense resin. Fringe accounts whisper of secret herbs added to those fires, intended to make listeners more receptive to spirit voices. Who knows, maybe those storytellers were the original ASMR artists, leaning in close to share their best crackle and hiss. You recall the drainage channel from earlier, a stroke of medieval engineering, and consider how these legends might have guided its placement. Maybe the original diggers were told that stones aligned with the phases of the moon would channel rainwater more effectively. That's pure conjecture, but it's fun to imagine ancient planners sketching star charts on the ground, mapping out not just walls but the cycles of time itself. Jokes aside, mainstream research suggests some walls align roughly with cardinal points, hinting at purposeful orientation. You wiggle your fingers in the dirt, as if testing for magnetic pull. A sudden gust swirls sand around your ankles, and you glance upward, half expecting a shimmering spirit bird to wheel overhead. Instead, a lone eagle, its wingspan immense, drifts on a thermal, keenly observing you like a VIP arriving fashionably late. You smirk at the thought that modern birdwatchers probably pay good money to spot that very eagle, while local legends might see it as a messenger from Yukumwi herself. Either way, its silent wings add a theatrical flourish to your tale. Further on, you find a small amphitheater-like hollow where the walls curve inward. Your voice echoes softly as you try a hushed hello, purely for research, of course. Urban legends often describe this spot as the Whispering Court, where storytellers performed under a full moon. One tale insists that the echo turned each phrase into a chorus of ancestral voices. Fringe enthusiasts still record audio here, hoping to catch ghostly murmurs. Mainstream archaeology, meanwhile, credits simple acoustics for the eerie resonance. You giggle, imagining future podcast hosts hyping up phantom whispers before revealing it's just good sound engineering. Sunlight shifts, casting spidery shadows that dance across knife-edged stones. You crouch to trace the worn steps leading into a shallow pit, alleged origin of the first fire festival, a harvest ritual said to bless the land and stones alike. Elders whispered of young people stepping barefoot into embers to prove their bravery, though most modern scholars scoff at literal foot burning. You're fairly certain this was more symbolic, perhaps involving heated stones placed at the pit's center. Still, the cheeky rumor that some daring teens did test their nerves each autumn keeps you grinning. As you stand, grass brushing your calves, you consider how these oral legends shaped collective memory. Without written records, myths held power. They guided craftsmen where to lay the first stones and advised priests when to chant for rain. Mainstream archaeology praises this living map function of legend, communities passing down topographical cues alongside spiritual guidance. You imagine generations learning wall building by heart, like an ancient YouTube tutorial, only slower and less likely to buffer. Beetles scuttle past, tiny engines of decomposition unnoticed in all the grandeur. You crouch, enthralled by their orderly march, and wonder if early storytellers ever wove insect behavior into their parables, perhaps a fable warning children not to leave food scraps in grain stores, lest they invite tiny marauders. Fringe folktales sometimes claim that beetles were messengers of death. You shake your head with a soft laugh, preferring the idea that the ancients had a practical warning baked into bedtime tales. A shaft of light flashes across a patch of lichen-covered wall, illuminating faded red ochre strokes. Someone long ago painted symbols here before oral stories were even spoken, an illustration to accompany a legend of a sun god dipping its feet in the nearby bay. You imagine storytellers pointing at these pigments, hands illuminated in flickering torchlight, as they spun yarns about divine footprints shaping the land. Mainstream consensus holds that ochre was used for ritual decoration. But those pigments may also have served as visual anchors for tales told under the stars. Your lungs fill with cool morning air, and you feel a subtle shift in the breeze, as if the ancient storytellers lean in for the next chapter. It's tempting to follow the curve of the nearest wall, eager to unearth more voices that time nearly swallowed. 3 jokes in and you've already mentioned tutorials, beetles, and psychic bird decorators, proof enough that this sleepy narrative holds more whimsy than a stand-up special at midnight. Yet even as you smirk at your own jokes, you know the power here lies in place and story entwined. Rising, you smooth dust from your sleeves and prepare to step toward the next enclave of legends, your mind alive with images of spirit-guided builders and starlit performances. There's more ground to cover, more echoes to chase, and every legend you encounter adds a layer of warmth to the cold stone beneath your feet. The city's voice ripples through the land, a soft murmur reminding you that memory can endure in myth as surely as in mortarless walls. You step over a low, crumbling wall and emerge onto a slope where the granite outcrops rise like the ribs of some ancient beast. The stones here feel different, coarser, flecked with mica that glints in the light, as if each rock holds a star trapped inside. You pause to run your palm along a smooth surface, marveling at how the wind and rain have buffed these monoliths into shapes both wild and strangely familiar. Mainstream scholars date many of these formations to natural geological processes millions of years before human hands rearranged other stones into walls, reminding you that great Zimbabwe's builders were working atop a foundation far older than any human memory. Ahead, you notice a panel of petroglyphs, shallow grooves incised into the rock face in patterns that defy immediate understanding. You crouch low, squinting to make out swirling spirals, angular triangles, and what might be a stylized kudu head. These carvings predate the city's peak by centuries, perhaps linked to hunter-gatherer groups who called this area home long before the Shona arrived. You lean in for a closer look, nearly nose to stone, and catch a whiff of warm dust mixed with the faint tang of lichens. It's as if the rock itself is exhaling the breaths of uncounted generations. Fringe bloggers sometimes argue that these petroglyphs map out hidden gold veins, a kind of ancient treasure map left by prospector priests. You smirk at the image of hooded figures sketching mineral deposits in the dark, perhaps snacking on stale biltong. Archaeologists, however, suggest the carvings served ritual or territorial purposes, marking sacred groves or ancient water sources. Either way, their presence hints at a layered history, where your footsteps trace not only the grandeur of the city's prime but also the footprints of earlier peoples. The slope levels out, and you find yourself standing before a particularly smooth granite dome crowned by a series of barely discernible etchings. You squint and imagine the faint outline of a large lizard, its back arched, tail coiled like a question mark. Some say this creature represents a chameleon, symbolizing adaptability and stealth, qualities prized by both hunter and trader. You press your fingertips into the shallow relief, feeling a tingle of connection, as though the artist's tool still rests, waiting for one more groove. Nearby, a shallow basin carved into the rock collects rainwater, forming a tiny natural reservoir. The locals call these healers' pools, because when full, the water runs with minerals thought to soothe skin irritations. You cup some droplets in your hand and let them trickle across your wrist, imagining the cool, slightly gritty sensation. Fringe tales tell of healers who added crushed soapstone to these pools, turning them into milky baths that doubled as cosmetic masks, burly spa treatments without the fluffy towels. You laugh at the thought of medieval mud masks trending on social media. Almost hidden behind a lichen-clad block, you spot a tiny carving of concentric circles, barely the width of your index finger. This microartistry suggests some carvings were meant for only the most observant, maybe apprentices proving their skill or initiates seeking secret signs. Mainstream interpretation posits that such carvings marked ritual initiation sites, places where youths learned craftsmanship under a mentor's watchful eye. You imagine a young apprentice shivering in dawn's chill, chisel in hand, trembling as they engrave their first circle into the cold rock. You stand and survey the hills, noticing how the granite forms natural amphitheaters. Wind funnels through narrow fissures, carrying echoes of distant calls. You shout a soft hello, and your voice returns stretched thin, a spectral counterpart to the petroglyph's silent speech. It's a reminder that this landscape was as much an artistic canvas as the city's walls. You picture poets and orators standing on these boulders, declaiming epic tales to small audiences gathered on stones worn smooth by generations. The idea tickles you, an open-air theater set beneath African skies, the ultimate Victorian picnic alternative. Leaning against a broad slab, you watch dust swirls merge into miniature tornadoes. Each one spotlighting a carving you'd missed moments before. You crouch once more to examine a zigzag line, tracing its path with your fingertip. Could it chart the course of a river that once flowed nearby? Or perhaps it's a symbolic reminder of life's unpredictable turns. Fringe enthusiasts sometimes suggest these carvings encoded esoteric wisdom, mathematical puzzles akin to those scribbled by medieval scholars, but nobody's found a Rosetta Stone for Zimbabwe granite yet. As you pivot, your boot nudges a broken chunk of quartz crystal embedded in the granite. The crystalline structure catches light in a dozen directions, showering tiny rainbows across the rock face. You pick it up, turning it over in your palm, and muse that early inhabitants might have prized such fragments for ceremonial jewelry or as talismans against misfortune. Mainstream finds of quartz flakes at nearby sites confirm that semi-precious stones circulated here, linking Great Zimbabwe to wider trade networks even before the city's heyday. You slip the crystal back into its crevice, imagining it left to gather stories alongside the petroglyphs. A low rumble echoes through the hills, just a distant truck on a nearby dirt road, but in this moment, it adds a dash of irony, a modern heartbeat intruding on your ancient reverie. You stifle a grin, as though sharing a private joke with time itself. History marches on, accompanied by the hum of engines rather than the beat of ceremonial drums. Still, the roads of today mirror old pathways, and you follow a faint track worn into the granite toward another cluster of carvings. Here, a series of parallel lines carved deep into the rock catch the light like veins of possibility. You run your finger along one groove and feel a slight vibration, almost a purr, though it's likely just the echo of your movement. Folklore insists these lines map the journeys of ancestral spirits, guiding souls to the afterlife. You lean back and let your jacket cushion a rough patch of stone, nibbling on a spare granola bar, because, naturally, you packed snacks. The crunch of oats against the trumpeting chorus of wind-carried gravel feels like the universe offering a crunchy soundtrack to your exploration. You rise, brushing dust from your knees, and follow a gentle incline toward the ridge. With every step, the petroglyphs thin out, giving way to uninterrupted panoramas of thorn scrub and distant hills. Yet you carry each carving in your mind, pulled into a tapestry of human expression that predates even this grand city. You think about the artists who made these marks, perhaps hunters marking a kill, priests invoking blessings, or children carving secrets under the cover of darkness. Reaching the ridge at midday, you stop to survey the valley below, feeling the sun's warmth seep through your shirt. In the distance, the main enclosure's walls shimmer like a mirage, each block a silent sentinel against time's relentless march. You take a deep breath, tasting the heat-laden air, and sense that the stones beneath your feet hold more than just echoes. They bear witness to humanity's urge to leave a trace. Pausing for a final moment, you run your hand over a broad, smooth slab that slopes gently toward the horizon. You close your eyes and lean in, listening for a whisper from the carving, the soft click of chisel on stone, the breath of an artist long gone. Whether these petroglyphs mark gold or gods, they've imprinted the landscape with human curiosity. And now, as you prepare to head down the far side of the hill toward waiting walls and whispering corridors, you carry forward the silent dialogue between rock and soul, ready for the next chapter in this slow, stone-spun saga. Your boots crunch softly over loose gravel as you descend the slope, following the faintest impression of a path, maybe once a herder's shortcut, or a trader's trail leading to the bustling heart of Great Zimbabwe. With every step, the vast stone walls ahead grow clearer, emerging from the earth like the fossilized bones of some architectural beast. Their curves are unexpected, no harsh corners here, just long, flowing arcs of granite enclosing space with an elegance that feels oddly modern. You tilt your head. Did the builders imagine these walls from above, like a flock of birds sketching blueprints in the sky? The great enclosure looms ahead, not imposing exactly, but steady. Like it's been waiting. Its outer wall runs nearly the length of a football field and stands over 30 feet high in places, yet not a single drop of mortar holds the stones together. Each granite block rests precisely, cut to size and slotted like puzzle pieces by artisans who clearly had more patience than you have for IKEA shelves. You press your palm against the wall's base and feel the warmth of the stone, sun-soaked and humming faintly, like it remembers being lifted into place. Historians still argue whether the great enclosure was a royal palace, a temple complex, or simply a very fancy architectural flex. There's a quiet satisfaction in not knowing. It lets your imagination wander freely. Maybe it housed queens and their retinues, or maybe it echoed with chants during moonlit ceremonies. Some fringe theorists say the curved walls were designed to channel energy from underground ley lines, transforming the entire structure into a kind of granite-powered cosmic battery. You raise an eyebrow at that one, but admit, grudgingly, that standing here does feel charged. Inside the walls, the terrain levels out into a broad courtyard dotted with low stone platforms, a few crumbling stairways, and that iconic conical tower, smooth-sided, solid, and entirely enigmatic. You circle it slowly, hands tucked behind your back like a museum-goer with all the time in the world. The tower is about as tall as a 3-story building, tapering gracefully like a termite mound or an upturned megaphone. It has no openings, no inner chamber. It's just, there. Theories abound. Some say it's a granary, symbolizing abundance and prosperity. Others see it as a phallic symbol, tied to fertility rites or male authority. Or maybe it's just what happens when an ancient architect stares too long at a spiral seashell and thinks, "You know what this place needs?" You laugh quietly and imagine the ancient project manager explaining the design to skeptical laborers. No, seriously, this is going to tie the whole courtyard together. A nearby platform catches your eye. You climb a few uneven steps and sit down, letting your legs dangle over the edge. From here, you can take in the symmetry of the enclosure, the way the walls curve to shield and reveal. It's a kind of intentional secrecy, a design meant to guide movement, manage sight lines, maybe even control who could see whom at any given moment. Not bad for 13th century urban planning. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. Not for ghosts or whispers, but for birdsong bouncing off the stone, for the breeze threading its way between ancient crevices. There's something calming about how everything here has settled, not fallen, just eased into old age. It's the kind of architectural aging you wish you could emulate, a little cracked, a little mossy, but still standing proud. Sliding off the platform, you follow a curved passageway that narrows until your shoulders almost brush both sides. This corridor once led to private quarters, or perhaps ritual spaces. Archaeologists have found traces of clay floors here, potsherds, even glass beads from as far as India. You pause and try to picture it, not ruins, but a living space, the smell of roasted millet, the clink of jewelry, someone laughing just out of view. The walls here rise above you like canyon cliffs. Their surfaces are lichen-speckled and time-softened, but occasionally, a carefully shaped block catches your eye, placed not for function but for flair. You spot a herringbone pattern worked into a section of wall. Just for a few feet. No practical reason. Just a flourish, a little stone-based swagger. You smile. Even in the 14th century, someone couldn't resist the architectural equivalent of "look what I can do." In one corner of the enclosure, you find a small circular hut base, just the faint remains of a once thatched structure. This might have been a kitchen, or a storage area, or even someone's sleeping space. You imagine settling in here for the night, rolled in a reed mat, listening to hyenas giggle in the distance while the granite walls hug close and firm around you. Cozy. And potentially flea-infested, near the conical tower, you spot another platform, this one square and slightly elevated. Some believe it served as a viewing stage for rituals, a place where royalty sat in judgment or performance. You clamber up for a look and find the view strangely regal. The walls curve like embracing arms. You picture dancers in brightly dyed cloth whirling across the courtyard, drums echoing off the stone, smoke curling from incense pots. The air thick with heat and possibility. You descend slowly, your hand trailing along the wall's edge. The stone is cool now, shaded from the sun, and you feel the micropits of erosion beneath your fingertips, tiny valleys carved by centuries of weather. These walls have stood through political upheavals, droughts, colonial interference, and centuries of speculative documentaries. And still, they stand, a flash of green catches your eye, a lizard sunning itself atop a ledge. It freezes, then scurries off, its claws scritching over granite like fingernails on an old chalkboard. You grin. Even the wildlife here seems historic. You wonder if that lizard's ancestors watched similar humans shuffle through, poking and gawking and occasionally tripping over uneven stones. Before leaving the enclosure, you glance back at the conical tower one more time. It's unchanged, of course, serene in its mystery. You give it a respectful nod, as if acknowledging a fellow introvert who prefers to remain misunderstood. Then you duck through a narrow exit passage, the walls pressing close like a whispering farewell. Emerging once again into sunlight, you blink and stretch. The city spreads ahead, with more ruins waiting beyond, but the great enclosure lingers in your mind, a place where function met flair, where mystery still hums beneath the stone. You press forward, your steps lighter now, like the stones themselves have shared a little secret, tucked into your backpack with your granola bars and bottled water. You walk beneath a low stone arch, its keystone just brushing your hair as you duck slightly, and step into what was once a sprawling network of dwellings, homes, kitchens, workshops, all framed by dry-stacked walls that curve like old rivers frozen in place. This is the Valley Complex, the part of Great Zimbabwe where the heartbeat of daily life once echoed loudest. Here, beneath the shadow of royal enclosures and sacred towers, people cooked, traded, sang, fought, raised children, and probably complained about the weather. The air feels different here. Warmer. Closer. As if the city's true soul lives in these modest outlines of forgotten homes. You pause beside a partially collapsed hut foundation. Its circular footprint barely more than a ring of stones peeking through scrub grass. Yet your imagination does the heavy lifting. You picture woven reeds forming the walls, a conical thatched roof above, smoke trickling out of a central hole like a whisper escaping, pottery shards crunch lightly beneath your boots. You pick up a fragment, marveling at the crosshatched design etched into its curve. Historians note that Great Zimbabwe's pottery was both utilitarian and expressive, with certain styles reserved for particular rituals or social classes. You imagine the potter, elbows dusted with clay, turning the wet earth on a simple wheel, hands shaping the soft body of a future storage jar. Maybe they hummed while they worked. Maybe they yelled at their apprentice for messing up the lip, for the third time. Off to your right, a long, low stone wall curves with mathematical grace, leading to a central corridor that once separated domestic areas from ceremonial or communal spaces. Archaeologists believe that Great Zimbabwe's layout wasn't random. Certain patterns repeat, suggesting a kind of urban zoning: quiet neighborhoods for extended families, workshop zones for smithing and crafting, and possibly even trade depots where merchants offloaded goods from far-flung lands. You stop beside a blackened patch of earth, still faintly charred, where carbon dating once confirmed traces of ancient hearths. Meals were cooked here, sadza bubbling in clay pots, goat meat sizzling over open flames. Maybe even a gourd of millet beer passed around during evenings filled with laughter and debate. You imagine someone leaning back after a heavy meal, looking up at the same stars you now see peeking through the afternoon haze. And you grin, because some things really haven't changed. A few feet away lies a trench-like depression running straight for several yards. Mainstream scholars say it was part of a drainage system, smartly engineered to direct rainwater away from buildings and into gardens or communal wells. But fringe thinkers claim it was a ceremonial water channel, designed to guide sacred flows through the settlement's heart. Some even suggest it doubled as a footbath, a cleansing rite before entering ritual spaces. You picture the priest, robes billowing dramatically, stepping through ankle-deep water while muttering incantations, and then slipping slightly on wet algae, because sacred doesn't mean immune to gravity. A clump of twisted trees casts shade over a cluster of low stone pens. These, you realize, were likely livestock enclosures. The people of Great Zimbabwe kept cattle, status symbols as much as food sources. The more cows you had, the more respected you were. Sort of like ancient Zimbabwe's version of having the newest SUV and a really good Wi-Fi signal. The pens still reek faintly of earth and memory, as if generations of hooves stamped stories into the soil. There's evidence of metallurgy here too. You find a blackened, slag-strewn patch where copper and iron were smelted in clay furnaces. You crouch and brush away debris, uncovering a smoothed stone anvil. The clang of hammers must have rung through the air constantly. Metal tools, decorative bangles, trade goods, all forged right here. Historians marvel at how organized it all was, or processed in one area, shaped in another, cooled and stored elsewhere. You pause, squinting into the light, imagining the glow of molten metal pouring like liquid fire into molds. And behind it all, maybe someone shouting, "Don't touch that yet, it's hot." In a language lost to time but universal in tone, the sun shifts, casting long shadows across the landscape. As you follow a worn path deeper into the valley, you start to notice small stone platforms, some circular, some rectangular, tucked between trees and rock outcrops. Scholars believe these were family shrines, places to commune with ancestors through offerings and prayer. A chicken feather still clings to one ledge, fluttering in the breeze. You gently run a finger over the stone, and for a moment, your breath slows, your thoughts soften. This was personal history, quiet, tender, as sacred as the towering conical monuments. Historians still argue whether the entire valley was carefully planned or simply evolved over time. Was there a master blueprint? A city architect sketching grand designs in the dust with a stick? Or did people just build where it felt right, clustering around kin and water sources, letting footpaths grow like vines between structures? The debate lingers, unresolved, but one thing's certain: the layout wasn't random. It pulsed with intention, shaped by needs both spiritual and practical. In a secluded corner, you find a worn step leading down into what looks like a sunken courtyard. Its walls are low but carefully constructed, and at its center rests a wide flat stone worn concave by years of use. Perhaps it was a communal meeting place. Perhaps a place of judgment. Or perhaps just a shared workspace where neighbors sat weaving mats, gossiping and grumbling about politics. You can almost hear it. That trader from Sofala shortchanged me again. next time, I'm charging him double. You smile and keep walking, your steps now tracing the pulse of daily life. Unlike the grandeur of the great enclosure, this part of the city feels more like home, more human. It's where people stubbed toes on stones in the dark, where children scrawled patterns in the dust, where love stories began and ended. You step over a stone threshold and imagine someone once stepping out of the same spot. Rubbing sleep from their eyes, cursing a rooster, and reaching for the day. And now, it's just you, breathing in that same air, hearing the same wind push through the scrub, watching the same sun dip toward the horizon. A few crickets chirp nearby, sounding exactly like they did 8 centuries ago, because crickets, you're starting to suspect, are immortal. This was great Zimbabwe not as a monument, but as a community, a city of artisans, herders, families, and dreamers. Its valley neighborhoods were the quiet heartbeat beneath its stone skin, the place where history brewed over cooking fires and cooled in clay pots. You stand a little longer, letting the sounds and silences of this everyday world settle into your bones. Then you turn, slowly, and head toward the next cluster of stories waiting in the stone. You follow a narrow, winding path that snakes uphill from the valley floor, the earth dusty and fine beneath your feet. Every so often, smooth stones jut out like ancient knuckles through the soil, guiding your steps upward. The trees thin, the air shifts, and then, almost without warning, you arrive at a clearing where walls rise tall and sure against the sky. Welcome to the great enclosure. It stands like a silent giant, more fortress than home, more enigma than palace. Its outer wall, some parts rising over 30 feet, is curved like a colossal serpent curled into itself. You walk alongside it, running your hand along the sun-warmed granite. Not a single drop of mortar holds it together. Yet the stones nestle so tightly you can't even slip a blade of grass between them. It's equal parts architectural genius and really patient stacking. Inside, space opens up. You step into the core of what was once the city's most sacred or elite zone. Some believe it was the royal residence, Zimbabwe's answer to a palace. Others think it served as a ritual center, a place not for sleeping, but for summoning. Your footsteps echo faintly now, a rhythmic reminder that you're alone in a space that once teemed with ceremony, secrets, and power plays. At the center looms the conical tower. About 30 feet high, thick and stubby like an oversized beehive, it looks intentionally mysterious. It has no doors, no windows, no internal chambers that anyone can see. It just is. A stone monolith of silence. Some scholars suggest it symbolized grain storage, a statement of wealth and sustenance. Others argue it was an emblem of male authority, a sort of ancient flex in granite. One fringe theory proposes it was acoustically tuned to enhance chants or drum beats. Another claims it was an elaborate decoy for looters, guarding absolutely nothing. You circle it slowly, watching how the sunlight kisses one side and leaves the other in shadow. You can't help but grin. This tower, squat and aloof, is basically the historical version of that one mysterious neighbor who never opens their curtains. Past the tower, you wander through narrow passageways hemmed in by high walls. The corridors twist and turn unexpectedly, like a stone labyrinth. Some say this was deliberate, to confuse invaders or symbolically cleanse visitors as they move toward sacred spaces. You reach out and touch one of the side walls. It's warm and faintly vibrating with bees from a nearby hive. The passage narrows, barely wide enough for your shoulders, and you imagine someone long ago brushing the same stones as they passed through in ceremonial procession. At one junction, a carved soapstone bird once stood. These birds, 8 of them in total, were found within the ruins, perched atop columns or stashed away. They're stylized, not exactly owls or hawks, but something between. Most likely battlers, a local eagle species. But others argue they're entirely symbolic, a totem of the Shona people, an ancestral messenger, or, depending on who you ask, Zimbabwe's first attempt at branding. You smile. That bird, with its blank stare and outstretched wings, is now on the national flag. A sort of historical Easter egg that went mainstream. You crouch beside a cluster of stones at the base of a wall and trace their curved pattern. This, you recall, is part of the famous chevron and herringbone motifs built directly into the enclosure walls. No structural reason. Just design. Art for art's sake. Which means someone, hundreds of years ago, looked at all these bare rocks and said, you know what this wall needs? Zigzags. And then proceeded to make them. Flawlessly. The attention to detail is everywhere. Drainage ducts slope at precise angles. Tiny runoff tunnels peek from beneath walls. Each corner turns with gentle elegance. There's a harmony here, stone arranged with the same rhythm as music, the same care as weaving cloth. It's not just functional, it's beautiful. And not by accident, and yet, for all its majesty, the great enclosure was never a fortress. There are no battlements, no arrow slits, no clear defensive features. It wasn't meant to keep enemies out, it was built to impress, to contain, to conceal. A show of wealth and skill more than a fortress of war. You imagine a foreign envoy arriving, craning their neck to take in the walls. Calculating the craftsmanship, and quietly revising their opinion of the kingdom they were about to negotiate with, you pause near a stone bench, low and flat, tucked into the wall's curve. Someone once sat here, perhaps a queen in ceremonial garb, perhaps a priest decoding omens, or maybe just a very tired stonemason on lunch break. You sit too, just for a moment, and let the sun warm your face. The bees are still humming. A lizard skitters across your shoe and doesn't even pause. Clearly, you're the tourist here. As you wander toward the far end of the enclosure, the shadows grow longer. The great enclosure has no roof, of course, just open sky framed by ancient stone. The light changes constantly, pools of gold in one corner. Streaks of shadow in another. It must have looked different every hour of the day. Morning rituals here would have caught the rising sun slicing through mist. Night ceremonies under a blanket of stars. You look up. A hawk wheels lazily overhead. For a second, the quiet almost feels staged, as though the city holds its breath when watched. And yet, it's never completely silent. Not really. There's always the whisper of wind, the chatter of unseen insects, the creak of branches beyond the wall. You wonder what it would have sounded like in its prime: drums, voices, laughter, perhaps a goat bleating at just the wrong moment. Human noise, layered and imperfect. Alive. There's one last theory, more whispered than published, that the enclosure wasn't for people at all, but for spirits. A sacred structure not meant to be lived in, but inhabited by the divine. A kind of giant stone offering. If that's true, then walking here is like tiptoeing through someone else's temple. You slow your pace, your breath. Just in case, as you prepare to step back through the narrow gate. You glance behind one last time. The great enclosure doesn't reveal everything. It never has. It offers impressions, gestures, never confessions. It's a stone stage without a script. You smile. Some mysteries, after all, are better left half solved. It gives you something to wonder about as you wander off. You leave the great enclosure behind, its stone curves still echoing in your mind like the last notes of a lullaby. But you're not done with Great Zimbabwe just yet. Not even close. Because now, your footsteps lead you toward another core of the city, the hill complex. If the great enclosure was its crown, this was the throne, the seat of spiritual and political power perched dramatically on a granite outcrop that watches everything below. You begin the climb. It's not Everest, but let's just say you wouldn't want to do it in ceremonial robes and beaded sandals. The path winds upward through boulders and dry brush, the stones beneath your feet sometimes flattened into steps, sometimes just awkwardly placed by gravity and time. The air smells of sun-warmed rock and occasional whiffs of whatever plant has bravely decided to grow here. You pause halfway up to catch your breath, historically accurate, by the way, and turn to look behind you. From here, you can see the full sprawl of the valley below, the great enclosure just a ring now, tucked among the trees. You imagine a ruler standing here centuries ago, surveying their city, feeling somewhere between regal and extremely winded. At the summit, the architecture shifts. The hill complex doesn't have the same sweeping grandeur of the great enclosure. Instead, it feels secretive, intimate. More like a set of closely held chambers clinging to the rock face than a showy palace. The walls here are thinner, the space is tighter, the layout decidedly non-tourbus friendly. You move between compartments, small stone courtyards, recessed niches, passageways just wide enough for one proud chieftain and their overburdened entourage. You're walking in the political heart of an empire, where decisions were made, alliances forged, and possibly, tea was brewed. Though it's still unclear whether they had a tea equivalent. Fermented sorghum beer, maybe. Near the edge of one rocky platform, you spot remnants of a staircase that seems to go nowhere, just a few stubborn stone steps clinging to the cliff. Some archaeologists believe these were ritual pathways, or even processional routes between sacred chambers. Others think they were part of an earlier building phase that got abandoned midway, which makes you picture a medieval contractor shrugging and saying, "We'll just build the ceremony around it." There's evidence here of serious intention. Pottery shards, thicker and more decorated than the plainer were found in the valley, suggest elite usage. A stone basin, cracked down the middle, might once have held water or sacred oils. You run your fingers along the rim. Smooth from centuries of use, or maybe just years of tourists doing exactly what you're doing now, you duck into a shallow alcove that archaeologists dubbed the ritual area, which feels appropriately vague. Bones found nearby point to animal sacrifices, possibly to ancestors or sky spirits. It's hard not to imagine flickering firelight here, drums pulsing in the night air, chants rolling down the hill like mist. And someone, maybe a priestess, maybe a king, holding out their hands to the sky and waiting for an answer that may or may not come. But the hill complex wasn't just about power. It was about access. Sitting atop this granite bluff, it let rulers literally rise above the rest of society. Physical elevation as a metaphor for status, turns out that concept predates high-rise corner offices by quite a few centuries. And from this high perch, messages could be relayed by drums, smoke, or fast-moving runners who definitely laugh at your resting heart rate. Then there are the caves, yes, caves. Carved into the rock face near the summit are natural hollows used, many believe, for spirit communication. The most famous is the so-called sacred cave. It's partly natural, partly shaped by human hands, and it echoes like nothing else. You stand at its mouth, whisper something silly, maybe your grocery list, and hear it bounce back in warbled fragments. It's not hard to see why ancient people thought spirits lived in places like this. Acoustics alone make it sound haunted. Here, oral traditions tell us, lived, or rather appeared, the voices of ancestors. Mediums or spiritual leaders might enter in trance-like states, seeking guidance from the unseen. You imagine someone kneeling here. Eyes closed, swaying slightly to the rhythm of their breath, as dusk fell over the city below. It's beautiful and eerie in equal parts, like the setting for a ghost story with no jump scares, just slow, bone-deep knowing. Some researchers argue this very cave was the seat of power before the stone structures were ever built. Others say it remained the spiritual anchor long after the political capital shifted downhill. Either way, this place whispers louder than it speaks. You don't linger long, you climb slightly higher to a lookout that surveys everything: valley, enclosure, village ruins, the patchy outlines of ancient pathways. From here, the layout of Great Zimbabwe makes more sense. You see how the valley was organized: zones for farming, for living, for crafting. You spot where smaller enclosures once stood, housing for nobles or elite artisans. It's like seeing the blueprint of a dream city, half forgotten, but stubbornly real. And then, it hits you: no one carved inscriptions here. No stone slabs with neat rows of script, no graffiti scratched into the walls saying Musa was here. No written records at all. Everything you've just seen, the hill complex, the great enclosure, the soapstone birds, the pottery, the passageways, it all had to be interpreted from architecture, oral lore, and a scattering of objects. Like trying to understand someone's diary by the shape of their handwriting alone, historians still argue whether the hill complex was the real capital, a ceremonial zone, or a sacred mountain retreat. The truth probably dances somewhere in between. What's clear is that it was central, not just geographically, but emotionally. Even today, pilgrims still come here, offering snuff or coins or prayers to the ancestors who, in many ways, still live here. You stand a moment longer, letting the wind press against your back. Then, carefully, you begin your descent. Each step carries you not just downward, but further into the city's quieter zones, where daily life, not dynasties, wrote its slow and steady story. You descend from the hill complex with care, each step accompanied by the quiet crunch of grit underfoot and the occasional soft clatter of a loose pebble tumbling away. The breeze follows you down, a playful current that flutters your sleeves and whispers through dry brush. As you reach the base once more, the city opens up again, not in grandeur this time, but in the lived-in sprawl of everyday life. This is where people cooked, argued, made pottery, told stories, got married, stubbed their toes, and sneezed into the crooks of their elbows just like you. You are now wandering through the common spaces of ancient Great Zimbabwe. The valley that spreads gently before you was once home to thousands, some say as many as 20,000 people at its peak. You pass by low stone wall remains that snake in every direction like forgotten crop circles. These weren't defensive barriers or monuments to grandeur. These were homes. Enclosures for families, livestock pens, cooking spaces, granaries. Most of the houses themselves were built from daga, earth mixed with water, cow dung, and gravel, plastered over a wooden frame. Sadly, no daga walls survived the centuries. Which means the city once looked fuller, more rounded, maybe even slightly cozier than its skeleton suggests today. You close your eyes for a moment and let the image reconstruct itself. That open patch there. Probably a courtyard where someone's grandmother once cracked maize in a clay pot. That tree stump. Maybe the remnant of a giant fig that offered shade and gossip. You picture children darting around walls, goats bleating indignantly, and the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of grain being pounded. You pause at the remnants of a hut foundation, a circle of stones still stubbornly intact, as if waiting for its roof to return. These circles were the base outlines for houses, arranged in clusters that archaeologists call crawl-style homesteads. In many ways, the layout mirrors rural Shona settlements today. The echoes of continuity are oddly comforting, like a neighborhood that's refused to forget itself. And yes, this is where we talk about pottery. You knew it was coming. Archaeologists and historians absolutely adore pottery. And for good reason, it survives. Fire it once and, short of hurling it off a cliff, it's basically immortal. The clay pots found here range from delicate cooking vessels to thick-rimmed storage jars. Some are painted. Some have zigzag grooves. One even has what looks suspiciously like a doodle, maybe ancient boredom during potter's class. You come across a fragment lying half buried in the dust. A thumbprint, pressed into the clay centuries ago, is still visible. That print belonged to someone. A potter whose name is lost, but whose fingerprint is somehow still here. It's enough to make you blink a few times in slow motion. Nearby, a scattering of small iron tools lies inside what was once a workshop area. Great Zimbabwe wasn't just a religious or political capital, it was also a thriving industrial one. Metalworking was a respected trade. Tools, weapons, even ornaments were forged in earth ovens right here. Imagine the glow of hot coals at dusk, the clang of a hammer echoing across the valley. Somewhere, a child was probably told, "Don't touch that." And promptly touched it anyway. You follow a trail that skirts what may have once been a market lane. It's hard to say for sure, no vending stalls or price tags survived. But trade goods from as far away as Persia, China, and India have been found here: glass beads, Chinese porcelain, and fragments of Islamic ceramics. All signs that this place wasn't just a provincial capital. It was cosmopolitan. Well-connected. An African Manhattan, minus the skyscrapers and taxis, but with a whole lot more soapstone. It's weird to imagine ancient traders comparing prices on imported goods in the middle of southern Africa, but here we are. Someone had to be the middleman, and Great Zimbabwe rose to the occasion. Gold, ivory, and possibly cattle were traded for luxury imports that made their way up the Swahili coast and beyond. You picture a local trader holding up a delicate blue and white bowl and thinking, it's nice, but is it that nice? And that gold? Oh yes, there was gold. Not in huge piles, mind you, Indiana Jones fans, please lower your expectations, but enough to make the city regionally powerful. Gold dust and nuggets were likely panned from rivers or mined from shallow veins in nearby hills. It was smelted and shaped into jewelry, currency, and probably gifts to cement alliances. You smile, imagining the world's oldest bribe in the form of a gold bracelet. You stop near what appears to be a former granary, stone-walled, circular, slightly raised from the ground. A food vault, essentially. Imagine being a 14th century teenager sneaking into it for a forbidden scoop of millet. That scent of grain, dry and sweet, must have lingered in the air, alongside the less poetic smell of goats and human sweat. Cities are rarely fragrant in the way museums pretend. You begin to notice something subtle: the city layout isn't a strict grid. It curves, responds to terrain, shifts in soft undulations. Houses weren't aligned to prestige or symmetry, they were arranged according to relationships. Family proximity. Privacy needs. Space for animals. The layout itself whispers a way of life where community trumped design. It's refreshingly human. As you explore further, the ghosts of daily life continue to rise around you, not as specters, but as habits. You find a worn stone with a smooth groove down the center. A sharpening stone. Nearby, a tiny bead, blue and nearly translucent, winks at you from the soil. Someone wore that once, maybe at a wedding. Maybe just because they felt like looking fancy. Small choices echo the loudest. You sit beneath a mopane tree, letting its dappled shade flicker across your arms. A bird calls, a real one, not symbolic or soapstone. It's easy to forget you're in a ruin. Everything here feels quietly alive. You realize that, for all the talk of vanished empires and lost cities, Great Zimbabwe isn't gone. Its bones are right here, and its heartbeat, you're pretty sure, never entirely stopped, somewhere beyond this valley, people still carry the oral histories. The clan names. The place-based pride. And maybe, just maybe, a few of those exact same pottery patterns. Civilization didn't collapse here. It changed shape. Moved. Adapted. Grew. You take a deep breath, then stand and brush the dust from your legs. The sun is now angling low, casting shadows that stretch like sleepy fingers across the earth. And you've got a few more mysteries to walk through. From the valley's calm, your steps take you toward the edge of the settlement where the city blends with the wild. Here, the landscape becomes less tamed, the stone walls thinner and less frequent, until they dissolve altogether into open plains and rocky outcrops. This boundary between human order and natural chaos held its own mysteries and everyday rhythms. It was a place where the practical met the spiritual, and where stories of wildlife intertwined with the heartbeat of the city. You spot the remains of a small enclosure, likely an animal pen, its low walls hinting at livestock management. Cattle were central to Great Zimbabwe's economy and culture, not just for meat, but for social status and spiritual symbolism. Owning many cattle meant wealth, power, and respect, as you might guess from any culture with a cattle obsession. You imagine a herder guiding a slow-moving herd across dusty plains, the low hum of cattle calls mingling with the rustle of grasses. Nearby, evidence suggests people also raised goats and sheep, probably for milk, hides, and occasional ceremonies. The mix of animals points to a diversified rural economy that supported urban life. Managing these herds required knowledge of seasonal cycles, grazing patterns, and predator behaviors. Wolves. Not here. But hyenas and leopards prowled these lands, and your imaginary herder would be wise to keep a sharp eye. Speaking of predators, there's an intriguing archaeological tidbit about crocodiles. While the Zambezi River lies some distance from Great Zimbabwe, crocodile symbolism appears in soapstone carvings and local myths. In some oral traditions, crocodiles were seen as gatekeepers to the spirit world, fierce and enigmatic. So, while you won't find actual crocodiles sunbathing on the city walls, their presence loomed large in the cultural imagination. You might say crocodiles were the celebrities of the animal kingdom here, glamorous, a bit scary, and endlessly fascinating. As you wander closer to the woodland edge, you come upon traces of wild fruit trees, figs, marullas, and baobabs. These were crucial for food, medicine, and even shelter. The baobab, with its massive trunk and curious shape, is known as the tree of life. It stores water in its girth and provides edible fruit, leaves, and bark. Some baobab trees near Great Zimbabwe still stand today, silent witnesses to centuries of change. Medicinal plants were gathered from this fringe zone too. Ancient residents relied on roots, leaves, and barks for healing. For instance, the aloe plant was probably used to soothe wounds, much like it's used in modern skincare. Herbal knowledge was a communal treasure, passed from elders to younger generations like secret recipes. You step onto a flat rock covered in faint engravings, simple lines and shapes that some think are early attempts at symbolic communication. While no written language emerged here, symbols and signs might have helped organize trade, identify clans, or mark ritual spots. It's the closest you'll get to a text message from 14th century Great Zimbabwe. Historians still argue whether these marks were purely decorative, functional, or part of a proto-writing system. You hear the faint chirping of cicadas and the occasional squawk of a hornbill, sounds that probably haven't changed much in centuries. The air carries a warmth tempered by gentle breezes. The kind that coax the body into a slow, contented sigh. Back near the city edge, you notice an unusual stone slab resting quietly among the grass. Its polished surface stands out, almost unnatural in its smoothness. Archaeologists believe some of these slabs were used as grinding stones, milling grain into flour for daily bread or porridge. Imagine the repetitive motion, the sound of grains crunching, the slow rhythm of preparation that tied people to their meals and their communities. Food was the center of many social rituals here. Meals were communal events, often accompanied by music and storytelling. Picture a circle of people gathered around a fire, sharing millet porridge or roasted game, laughter mixing with the crackle of flames. It's not just nourishment, it's connection, memory, and identity. Trade routes from Great Zimbabwe extended far beyond these plains, linking up with the Indian Ocean coast and, through it, the wider world. This made the city part of a vast network where goods, ideas, and stories traveled long distances. Exotic goods like glass beads and porcelain weren't just luxuries, they were symbols of the city's reach and prestige. You pause to consider this for a moment. Great Zimbabwe, while deeply rooted in its African context, was simultaneously part of a global exchange long before globalization was a buzzword. A sophisticated society thriving through local innovation and international connection, quite the impressive balancing act. As the sun dips lower, casting an amber glow over the plains, you feel the gentle pull of dusk. The city and its surrounding lands, with their stone walls and wild edges, seem to settle into a quiet rhythm, much like you do at the end of a long day. You turn back toward the ruins, ready to explore more secrets hidden in the stone. You move deeper into the mysteries of Great Zimbabwe, tracing the contours of its most iconic structure, the Great Enclosure. This monumental elliptical wall is unlike any other in the city, standing tall and proud with an air of quiet authority. Made from carefully stacked granite blocks, it curves around a central courtyard, enclosing what once may have been an important ritual or political space. The precision of the stonework here is remarkable. Each block fits snugly without mortar, a technique called dry stone masonry. As you run your fingers along the smooth, cool granite, you can't help but admire the skill and patience it must have taken to create this imposing barrier. The wall's height, reaching up to 5 meters in some places, and its thickness, over 2 meters wide, speak to both practical and symbolic functions: protection, prestige, and perhaps spiritual power. You circle the wall, noticing the famous conical tower rising within the enclosure. This tower is a bit of an architectural puzzle, neither defensive nor clearly functional. It resembles a giant grain silo but seems far too elaborate to be purely utilitarian. Some suggest it symbolized royal authority or served as a sacred monument. Here's where the scholarly debates get interesting. Historians still argue whether the Great Enclosure was primarily a royal residence, a religious center, or a display of wealth designed to impress visitors. No definitive written records have survived to settle the question. It's one of those historical choose-your-own-adventure moments where every theory has its fans. You imagine standing inside the enclosure centuries ago. The air thick with incense, perhaps, or the low murmur of court advisors and nobles discussing the affairs of state. Maybe a high priest performs rituals, or the chief addresses his people. The smooth stone underfoot is warmed by the sun, and the shadows cast by the walls create cool pockets of relief. Outside the great enclosure, the hill complex looms. This cluster of stone terraces and structures crowns the highest point of the city. Archaeologists believe it housed the elite, rulers, religious figures, or wealthy families. The panoramic views from here are breathtaking, offering a 360-degree panorama of the surrounding valleys and plains. From this vantage point, you could spot incoming visitors or threats, and more importantly, survey the vast lands that the city controlled. You recall that the hill complex features unique soapstone carvings, particularly the bird sculptures. These Zimbabwe birds are carved in the shape of battler eagles, perched on stone monoliths. They are the most recognizable symbols of Great Zimbabwe today, appearing on Zimbabwe's national flag and currency. The birds likely held spiritual significance, possibly representing ancestors or deities. one particularly quirky detail is how these birds have survived thousands of years exposed to the elements. Some say it's a testament to their sacred status that people preserved and revered them. Others speculate about local materials or ancient protective rituals that helped preserve their condition. The truth remains partly cloudy, wrapped in legend. You can almost hear the soft flutter of wings as you admire the carvings, imagining how these stone birds might have been a reminder to the people below to look up, to the skies, to the ancestors, and to their collective future. The complex layout of Great Zimbabwe's walls and enclosures reflects a society structured around hierarchy, spirituality, and communal identity. These weren't just practical buildings, they were storytelling stones, each block a word in a silent narrative. There's also an intriguing architectural puzzle in the layout. The absence of doorways in some walls suggests symbolic boundaries, spaces you could see into but not enter. These boundaries blurred the lines between the physical and spiritual worlds. Reinforcing the city's sacred character, you notice the interplay of light and shadow as the sun begins to dip, casting the stone walls in hues of soft gold and deep amber. The city seems to breathe in this light, whispering its ancient secrets to anyone patient enough to listen. As you linger near the great enclosure, you reflect on how much has been lost to time, and how much still speaks through the stones. Great Zimbabwe remains a magnificent enigma, a puzzle box of history wrapped in mystery, waiting for every curious traveler to touch its cool walls and imagine the lives that once pulsed within. You leave the great enclosure behind, your footsteps echoing softly as you wander toward the lesser-known parts of the site, the smaller enclosures and scattered ruins that pepper the hillsides. These quieter corners often get overlooked by visitors, but for you, they offer a treasure trove of insights into the everyday lives of Great Zimbabwe's inhabitants. One such spot is a modest stone enclosure with remnants of a hearth at its center. The charred stones whisper of countless meals prepared here, slow-cooked stews, roasted grains, and maybe the occasional wild game. You imagine the smell of smoky fires mingling with fresh herbs, the soft murmur of conversations, and the gentle clink of pottery as people gathered around. Nearby, you spot fragments of iron tools and arrowheads. The presence of these weapons suggests the importance of hunting and defense in daily life. But don't imagine constant warfare. Instead, picture careful expeditions into the surrounding wilderness, with hunters relying on stealth and knowledge of the terrain. Maybe a young hunter, nervous but determined, aiming his bow at an antelope while his companions hold their breath. You come across evidence of bead-making workshops, tiny glass beads scattered like jewels among the dust. These beads weren't just decorative, they were powerful symbols of identity, status, and trade. Imagine artisans carefully crafting these delicate objects, threading beads onto strings, and creating jewelry that told stories of clans, marriages, or personal achievements. The workshop area also suggests a division of labor within the community. Skilled craftspeople likely passed their techniques down through generations, preserving ancient traditions and styles. This kind of artisan economy complemented the city's trade networks, connecting Great Zimbabwe to far-flung regions. There's a subtle rhythm to these ruins, a pulse that reveals how different parts of the city fit together. Not every stone wall was meant to impress visitors. Many were built to shelter families, store goods, or serve as workshops, quiet spaces where the ordinary magic of daily life unfolded. You take a moment to appreciate the city's water management. While there are no grand aqueducts or canals, natural springs and rainfall patterns were cleverly utilized. You spot shallow stone-lined channels that may have directed water to gardens or livestock. In a dry climate, this kind of ingenuity was vital. Imagine women filling clay pots at a spring, chatting softly, and children playing nearby. You recall that Great Zimbabwe was part of a broader cultural area known as the Shona-speaking peoples, whose descendants still live in Zimbabwe today. This continuity offers a comforting link across centuries, connecting ancient stonework to contemporary culture. another fascinating detail lies in the trade goods found in these quieter areas. Unlike the imported luxury items found in the great enclosure, here you find local products, beads made from ostrich eggshells, bone tools, and pottery decorated with unique patterns. This contrast reflects social stratification, luxury for the elite, everyday wares for most residents. Scholars still argue whether the city's population was mostly sedentary or if some groups moved seasonally with livestock and trade. This debate shapes how we understand the fluidity and resilience of Great Zimbabwe's society. As the afternoon wanes, you settle into a shaded spot beneath a cluster of mopane trees. Their leaves rustle softly, a gentle accompaniment to the fading light. You breathe in the dry, warm air, feeling a connection to the countless people who once lived, loved, worked, and dreamed here. There's a subtle rhythm to these ruins, a pulse that reveals how different parts of the city fit together. Not every stone wall was meant to impress visitors. Many were built to shelter families, store goods, or serve as workshops, quiet spaces where the ordinary magic of daily life unfolded. You take a moment to appreciate the city's water management. While there are no grand aqueducts or canals, natural springs and rainfall patterns were cleverly utilized. You spot shallow stone-lined channels that may have directed water to gardens or livestock. In a dry climate, this kind of ingenuity was vital. Imagine women filling clay pots at a spring, chatting softly, and children playing nearby. You recall that Great Zimbabwe was part of a broader cultural area known as the Shona-speaking peoples, whose descendants still live in Zimbabwe today. This continuity offers a comforting link across centuries, connecting ancient stonework to contemporary culture. Another fascinating detail lies in the trade goods found in these quieter areas. Unlike the imported luxury items found in the great enclosure, here you find local products, beads made from ostrich eggshells, bone tools, and pottery decorated with unique patterns. This contrast reflects social stratification, luxury for the elite, everyday wares for most residents. Scholars still argue whether the city's population was mostly sedentary or if some groups moved seasonally with livestock and trade. This debate shapes how we understand the fluidity and resilience of Great Zimbabwe's society. As the afternoon wanes, you settle into a shaded spot beneath a cluster of mopane trees. Their leaves rustle softly, a gentle accompaniment to the fading light. You breathe in the dry, warm air, feeling a connection to the countless people who once lived, loved, worked, and dreamed here. The city's quieter corners may not have the grandeur of the great enclosure, but they hum with the life of a vibrant community. Here, the stones tell stories not only of kings and rituals but of cooks, artisans, hunters, and children, ordinary people who made Great Zimbabwe a home. You rise, dust yourself off, and prepare to explore yet another facet of this fascinating city. After all, the story is far from over. As the sun starts its slow descent, you wander toward the outskirts of Great Zimbabwe, where the wild grasslands stretch out toward the horizon. Here, the city's influence meets the vast African plains, a transition zone buzzing with quiet energy. This boundary area is where trade caravans would have arrived, laden with goods and stories from distant lands. You picture a caravan slowly making its way over dusty tracks, camels laden with sacks of gold dust, ivory, and exotic beads. The caravan leader calls out commands, and the air carries the scent of spices and leather. These trade routes connected Great Zimbabwe not only to nearby communities but also to the bustling ports of the Indian Ocean coast. Along these routes, traders exchanged everything from local iron tools to Chinese porcelain, creating a vibrant web of cultural and economic exchange. Imagine a trader admiring a fine porcelain cup, wondering about the hands that shaped it thousands of miles away. This kind of long-distance trade was rare in the medieval world, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, marking Great Zimbabwe as a significant node in the global network. You notice small, scattered ruins along the routes, simple shelters or way stations for weary travelers. These humble outposts offered food, rest, and protection, acting as vital lifelines for trade caravans. You imagine the quiet conversations at dusk, stories shared under starlit skies. And the crackle of campfires echoing across the plains. The goods that moved along these paths reveal fascinating glimpses into ancient consumption and taste. For instance, archaeologists have found cowrie shells, which served as currency and decorative items, showing links to the Indian Ocean world. These shells must have felt like tiny treasures in the hands of great Zimbabwe's residents. Back in the city, the arrival of trade goods wasn't just economic, it was deeply symbolic. Possessing foreign items signaled prestige and connected local elites to a broader cosmopolitan identity. Yet, these exotic goods blended seamlessly with local traditions, creating a rich cultural tapestry. In this borderland, nature and human enterprise mingled. The plains were home to wildlife, antelopes, zebras, and birds of all colors. You might hear the distant call of a Cory bustard, the heaviest flying bird native to the region, or spot a solitary termite mound standing like a small monument. The balance between wilderness and city life was delicate and deeply respected. The city's inhabitants used natural resources with care. For example, baobab fruits from the nearby trees were eaten fresh or dried for later, offering important nutrition during dry seasons. You can almost taste the subtly sweet and tangy flavor, a reminder of nature's generosity. Agriculture was another cornerstone of life here. Farmers cultivated millet and sorghum, hardy grains that thrived in the region's soil and climate. These crops provided steady sustenance and were often processed in communal grinding areas you've already visited. You come upon a shallow depression lined with stone, probably used to store grain or water. This practical infrastructure hints at advanced planning and cooperation within the community. Trade, agriculture, and natural bounty combined to create a resilient economy. You might say Great Zimbabwe was a well-oiled machine, powered by knowledge, cooperation, and a good measure of patience. Historians still argue whether the wealth of Great Zimbabwe came primarily from controlling trade routes or from agricultural surplus. This question shapes how we view the city's rise and its role in the region. As twilight deepens, you watch shadows lengthen over the plains. The gentle hum of insects rises, and the first stars wink awake. You feel the pulse of this ancient city, alive. With night settling in, your journey takes you inside the city's ritual heart, where sacred ceremonies once unfolded beneath the African sky. This part of Great Zimbabwe, though less visible today, was once alive with the rhythms of spiritual practice, an unseen thread weaving the community together through belief and tradition. You imagine a circle of elders and priests gathered near a fire, their faces flickering in the glow as they chant softly. Incense wafts through the air, mingling with the earthy scent of crushed herbs. These rituals weren't just about religion, they were acts of social cohesion, ensuring the city's prosperity and protection. Central to these ceremonies was the veneration of ancestors. The Zimbabwe birds you saw earlier weren't just art, they represented revered ancestors who guided the living. Ancestor worship connected the past and present, a gentle reminder that the city's foundation rested on generations of care and wisdom. One fascinating detail is the use of soapstone in ritual objects, smooth, durable, and symbolically pure. These carvings, including the birds, served as spiritual anchors, physical reminders of unseen forces. Some scholars suggest that rituals here may have involved offerings of food, cattle, or crafted goods to honor these spirits. You hear the soft clinking of small bells or rattles, instruments used to accompany chanting and dancing. The sound must have been hypnotic, a gentle heartbeat leading participants into trance-like states. Such altered states were believed to open channels to the spirit world, providing guidance or healing. In some corners of the city, small altars made from stone and earth hint at localized worship practices, perhaps dedicated to specific deities or natural forces. These intimate spaces contrast with the grandeur of the great enclosure, reflecting a layered spiritual landscape. Reflecting a layered spiritual landscape, curiously, some ancient pottery shards show signs of having been deliberately broken and buried, a practice thought to symbolize renewal or transition between life stages. You can almost feel the hands of those who perform these acts, their intentions wrapped in mystery. The role of women in these rituals remains a topic of lively debate among historians. Some evidence suggests women held key spiritual positions, possibly as priestesses or ritual specialists, though the full extent is unclear. This uncertainty reminds us how much of history is still waiting to be uncovered. You recall earlier mention of medicinal plants, many were likely used in ritual healing. Blending physical and spiritual health. Aloe, for example, may have been both a practical ointment and a sacred element. As the fire's glow dims, you feel a deep sense of continuity. Though centuries have passed, the connection between people, place, and spirit remains palpable here. The stones remember, and through them, so do we. Historians still argue whether these spiritual practices were centralized under royal authority or more community-driven. The answer may be both, reflecting a dynamic society capable of adapting and evolving. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining the chants fading into the night, the flickering firelight dissolving into the stars. The city's pulse slows but never stops. A timeless rhythm guiding all who listen. You step away from the city's spiritual core and venture toward the outskirts where the ancient city meets the wild landscape again, but this time your focus shifts to the fascinating animal motifs found throughout Great Zimbabwe. These designs, etched or carved into stone and pottery, reveal a culture deeply intertwined with the natural world. You spot a weathered stone carving depicting a crocodile, a creature both feared and revered. Crocodiles symbolized power and protection, and their image likely carried spiritual significance. Imagine the artist carefully etching each scale, the tool scraping rhythmically as the shape took form. These motifs served as silent stories, linking humans and animals in a shared existence. Birds, as you remember from the Zimbabwe birds, appear frequently, but so do other animals like snakes, elephants, and lions. Each symbol spoke to different qualities: wisdom, strength, danger, or guardianship. It's a visual language that the city's inhabitants understood intuitively. You wander over to pottery shards decorated with swirling animal patterns, remnants of vessels once used in daily rituals or feasts. The designs are fluid and stylized, inviting you to imagine the hands that shaped and painted them. These were not just practical objects but carriers of meaning and tradition. One quirky discovery is the presence of mythical creatures blending features of real animals, a serpent with a bird's head or a lion with fish scales. These hybrids might have symbolized spiritual concepts or legendary stories passed down orally. It's a reminder that imagination and belief danced side by side in Great Zimbabwe's culture. In addition to motifs, the city's architecture itself mimics natural forms. The conical tower, for example, is thought to resemble a granary, symbolizing abundance and prosperity. This blending of function and symbolism shows how deeply rooted the city's creators were in their environment. You consider the city's relationship with wildlife beyond symbolism. Hunting wasn't just for food, it was a carefully regulated activity, often tied to rituals ensuring respect for the animals and balance in nature. Overhunting was likely discouraged to protect the ecosystem that sustained the city. Another interesting tidbit is the discovery of cattle figurines and depictions, emphasizing the importance of livestock. Cattle were wealth, food, and social currency. You imagine herders tending to their herds as children play nearby, the distant lowing of cows mixing with laughter and song. Historians still argue whether these animal motifs served primarily decorative, spiritual, or political purposes, or a combination of all three. This uncertainty adds to the city's rich tapestry of meaning. You feel a gentle breeze carrying the scent of dry grass and earth, as the sun dips lower, casting long shadows. The animals etched in stone seem almost alive, frozen in time but breathing stories into the fading light. You pause, appreciating the blend of art, nature, and culture, a reminder that Great Zimbabwe was not just a city of stone but a living ecosystem of meaning and life. You step back into the heart of the ruins as the sky shifts from amber to deep indigo, and the silent walls of Great Zimbabwe stand like ancient sentinels under the emerging stars. Here, in the hush between day and night, the city's final enigma reveals itself, not in a single carving or chamber, but in the very atmosphere that clings to these stones. Each block, each corridor, each fading groove seems to pulse with questions that time has refused to answer. You wander through the great enclosure one last time, tracing the curves of its mortarless walls under the pale glow of twilight. The conical tower looms in silhouette, a monolith of unresolved purpose. Was it a symbol of fertility, a grain silo, or simply an architectural flourish? Historians still argue whether the tower's true meaning lay in ritual significance, communal storage, or a statement of elite power, and you find that ambiguity strangely comforting, like an unfinished lullaby that invites you to dream the final notes yourself. Beyond, the hill complex perches on its rocky throne, shadows pooling in hidden alcoves where spirit voices once spoke. You imagine the rituals that faded into legend, the medium's trance, the drummer's breath held in rhythmic suspense. No inscriptions survive to tell us exactly what was said beneath those stones. Some scholars propose that a lost script, perhaps painted on wooden boards or woven into textiles, carried the ancient prayers, while others argue that the entire spiritual life was preserved orally, an oral tapestry unraveled by time. The debate lingers, an echo without resolution. As you move toward the valley, the outlines of homesteads and workshops coalesce in your mind's eye into a living mosaic of daily life. Potsmiths, herders, hunters, and traders, all peopled these spaces. Yet when the city fell silent, their names vanished like mist. Archaeological digs yielded tools and pottery but no letters or scrolls. You pause by a smashed storage jar, its jagged edges soft in your palm. It's both ordinary and profound, a reminder that what survives is often fragmentary. In that fragment lies the allure of mystery. Venturing beyond the city's heart, you find yourself at the very edge of the ruins, where the stone gives way to grass and thorn. Here stands a solitary soapstone bird. Half buried in dust, its wings worn but still poised as if forever ready to take flight. This emblem, more than any other, embodies Great Zimbabwe's enduring enigma, a symbol lifted from its context, then repatriated as a national icon, yet never fully explained. Was it an ancestral messenger, a totemic guard, or simply art? The question glints in its blank gaze. You kneel beside the bird, fingertips brushing its carved feathers, and feel the weight of history pooling around you. The wind stirs, carrying a soft susurration through the nearby walls. You listen for the faintest echo of a chant, a marketplace's din, or a child's laugh, sounds that might linger in the stone. Instead, you hear only the steady pulse of your own breath, harmonizing with the night. A final glance at the concentric circles etched into a nearby wall reminds you of the petroglyphs scattered in the hills, echoes of even older peoples whose marks predate the city itself. Great Zimbabwe was built atop layers of history, each era laid like a sediment of human striving. And yet, no layer holds all the answers. Historians still argue whether the city declined due to ecological pressures, political strife, or shifting trade networks. Perhaps all played a part, or perhaps none did. The truth lies just out of reach. Rising, you brush the dust from your knees and stand at the threshold between ruin and sky. The city's stones align like a grand question mark against the horizon, inviting endless curiosity. You take a deep breath of night air, tasting granite and freedom, and realize that part of Great Zimbabwe's magic is its refusal to be fully known. It offers impressions, gestures, and whispers, but no final confession, walking away, you carry with you the sense that this city, though silent, is not closed. Its walls are invitations to wonder, its stones a challenge to imagination. And as you leave, the night settles around you and the ruins glow softly in the starlight, a timeless lullaby that lingers long after you've gone. You pause at the edge of memory, breath slowing as the hush of night deepens. Let the stones settle into your mind as gentle, enduring companions, no more questions, just the soft cadence of unspoken stories. You have walked through sunlit walls, climbed sacred heights, and touched the echoes of every life that thrummed through this ancient city. Now, let the final images fade like embers in a dying fire, the tower's silent curve, the hilltop shadows, the soapstone bird poised for flight. Allow your thoughts to drift beyond the boundaries of stone and earth, carried on the breeze that once stirred the robes of kings and priests. Think of the petroglyphs, the water channels, and the broken pot rim cradled in your hand. Each fragment, each groove, is a breath in the long exhale of history. Let them drift in and out of focus, like drifting leaves on a slow river. There is no need for answers. Great Zimbabwe's secrets are home to gentle wonder, and wonder is a cradle for sleep. So rest now, embraced by the hush of granite walls and African skies. Your journey through time pauses here, but the city's quiet heartbeat continues, a lullaby without end.